As more and more Necron tomb worlds awaken from their great sleep, the intelligent races of the Milky Way galaxy are only now realizing the empire-destroying power that was slumbering beneath their feet. Each reawakened dynasty is claiming back its territories with a savagery and speed that few armies can counter. Working independently from one another, some revived Necron tomb worlds seek not only to rebuild their empires, but release the pent-up frustration of losing their souls. No tomb world showcases this reawakened and historic bloodlust like the Novak Dynasty. Before the Necron tier went through the biotransference process to become Necrons, the Novak Dynasty was infamous for its long and elaborate blood rituals, and for the naked savagery of its army. In this ancient past, the Necron tier empire was divided up into dynasties just like it is today, except in a smaller and more localized area of the galaxy. As the empire grew, these dynasties became more and more independent as more of the Milky Way galaxy was conquered. This autonomy eroded the unity of the Necron tier, and internal wars between the different dynasties became common. This was known as the War of Succession. It was during this era of civil war that the Novak dynasty developed its thirst for sacrificial blood rituals. It wasn't enough for the ruling pharaohs of the dynasty to simply engage in violent battles for victory. Their dominance and power had to be placed on display by capturing rival warriors and spilling their blood on the altars of their tomb complexes. Because of this, the architecture of what would become the dynasty's tomb worlds soon began to illustrate the Novak's fascination with bloodletting. Channels in which blood could flow from the victim's body all the way down to the tombs of the underworld decorated each building, and as the Novak's territory grew, so did their need to capture enemies. Eventually, wars were fought for the sole purpose of sacrifice, and these rituals became an integral part of the culture of the Novak. Seen as rites of passages and a mark of great honor, the knowledge of these acts spread throughout the other dynasties, and many Necron tier understood the bizarre role they would have to play if they were ever captured by the Novak. You see, much like the rest of the Necron tier empire, the Novak revered their dead, and the vast tombs that covered much of their domain were structures raised to honor these long-gone ancestors, and in the Novak's culture, the blood flowing down to the tombs of the ancients formed a sacred connection between the living and the dead. It was through the blood of the sacrifice that messages and petitions could be sent to the deceased. Each victim was forced to hear the people's prayers to the dead, and join in on the sacred songs and processions that praised the power of the Novak dynasty. Once this part of the ceremony was over, the victim would be placed on an altar connected to the blood channels, and their body would be drained of blood in front of the entire city populace, who performed ritual dances and hymns. These strange and sadistic rituals continued even during the War in Heaven, where the blood of the Old Ones flowed through the Novak sacred cities. This would prove not just to their own race, but the entire galaxy, that the power of the Novak was unbreakable. And since that ancient time, the Novak warriors are unrecognizable, and their blood rituals are a thing of the past. However, their legions retain their bloodthirst. Few Necron legions are as frightening to face in battle as those that come from this dynasty. It's one thing to witness flesh and blood warriors slash a path through their foes, but to see glassy-eyed androids move from methodical mechanical killing to ever more frenzied industrial slaughter is another scale of horror entirely. The Novak offer no quarters or no mercy to their victims. Instead, they hack them apart like lunatic butchers set loose on a pen of livestock. They do not stop killing until their living metal bodies are drenched in gore and their victims are nothing more than dismembered meat. And the reason for this gruesome spectacle is that the memories of the dynasty's blood rituals still linger in the personality engrams of the Novak Necrons. Though they can be ponderous right before a battle's commencement, once the enemy's blood starts flowing, the engrams are triggered. They provide Novak soldiery with surges of vigor and aggression that prove nearly narcotic. Taking full advantage of this trait, the Novak nobility field vast numbers of infantry assets headed by bands of blade-wielding Lich Guard. They are augmented, many would say recklessly, with those of their dynasties who have fallen to the Destroyer Curse. The Destroyer Curse seems to affect the warriors of the Novak dynasty in greater numbers. The rage, anger, and despair of their soulless existence once awakened drives them into a killing frenzy. All they wish to do is hack apart the bodies and revel in the blood spilling. Referred to as the Heralds of Oblivion, the Novak Destroyers are feared by their fellow Necrons and can slaughter entire regiments in a matter of seconds. The Novak dynasty has become experts at building campaigns around the actions of these destroyers. They acknowledge the pointlessness of enforcing battle plans on these twisted and enraged warriors. Such a force possesses numbers and resiliency, yet its true might is revealed once its bloodlust awakens and the butchery begins. Employing these tactics, the Novak Galmak the Moonkiller has driven his legions relentlessly outwards from the crown world of Dol 4 in one gory conquest after another. They have crushed greenskins and human alike and show no signs of slowing. Now let's take a look at another truly evil Necron dynasty, the Maynarkh. With the opening of the Great Rift and the return of the Silent King, more and more dynasties are rising up to full strength and taking back the galaxy from the irresponsible and weak races that usurped the Necron's domain. The success of these dynasties can be credited to the Necron's highly advanced technology that somehow miraculously survived the 60 million years of hibernation. These technologies were powerful enough to wage war against the old ones, and they are now being used against humanity and every other race stupid enough to stand in the Necron's way. The dynasty that exemplifies this arrogant power is the Maynarkh dynasty. The Maynarkh dynasty has garnered a fearsome reputation amongst the galaxy's younger races since their worlds began to awaken. At first, the warriors of the dynasty operated under a defensive protocol, believing that only their crown world was being attacked. This meant that all trespassers onto their sacred tomb world would be annihilated and any of their primitive infrastructure destroyed. As more and more of the dynasty began to rise from their great sleep, the Maynarkh discovered that much of their ancient territory had been invaded. Worthless species made out of weak flesh and blood had foolishly settled on their domain. This infestation of lesser beings was so bad that even the fringe worlds were being pillaged of whatever resources they had. Faced with very real danger of being overrun, their surviving nobility consolidated the dynasty's strength upon the newly reconquered crown world of Gendon. Luckily, the Maynarkh had always been a tremendously rich dynasty and had funneled much of their vast resource wealth into the core world's hyperspatial vaults. Now they drew upon their horde to fashion legion upon legion of war engines, raise mighty defenses, and equip their warriors with the finest weaponry imaginable. There was even enough resources to send out legions of data-collecting scarabs that created the best possible extermination protocols for each unique threat. No fortress or citadel was left standing after each assault as the Maynarkh swept through their former domain, clearing out planet after planet. There were some worlds that put up a decent fight, but their fate had been sealed from the moment the dynasty crawled out of their tomb complex. After losing their claim on the Necron land, the lesser races hurled their armies against the newly fortified borders of the Maynarkh dynasty, and they were rebuffed with devastating casualties. To the arrogant Maynarkh dynasty, every race that attempted to counterattack or recapture their land was to be made an example of. The warriors of the dynasty would not rest until the perceived impotence of the attackers had been ruthlessly punished with utter annihilation. The well-appointed Maynarkh legions had another advantage in their war for survival. Greatest of the dynasty's cosmic treasures was the preserved head of the Yitzir, the last of its race, and a means by which the Necrons could peer into the skins of the future. Armed with such a prescient intelligence, the Maynarkh struck precisely where and when they needed to in order to crush any interlopers, transforming their defensive stance into a more offensive march of conquest. Now the Maynarkh legions are on the march, seizing and heavily fortifying new territories with Noctilith pylons before advancing again. They have openly aligned themselves with the return of the Silent King and seek nothing short of galactic dominance for their people. Now let's take a look at the Maynarkh dynasty and their ruler Nemesor. The Imperium of Man has waged many wars against the undying legions of the Necrons, and as more and more tomb worlds awaken, their savagery is made ever more apparent. One Necron overlord that showcases how unrelentingly brutal these ancient warriors can be is Kutlak, the World Killer. Kutlak is a Nemesor of the Maynarkh dynasty, earning him the title of Maktlan, or the Extinguisher of Life amongst his people. The brutality of this overlord stretches back to the ancient galactic war known as the War in Heaven, when the Necrons battled the Old Ones and before the Necrons entered their great sleep. Kutlak was regarded as the cruelest and most brutal of all the Nemesors in his dynasty. He was the killer who took particular pleasure in the humiliation of enemy champions and generals in personal combat, be they lords of rival dynasties or the warriors and servants of the Old Ones. A warrior first and foremost, Kutlak cared little of the intrigues of the dynasty's royal court, openly disdaining his high office, caring only that he was afforded the respect and glory that his conquests were due. It was so that while the reins of political power were held by others within the Maynarkh dynasty, the overall battlefield command of its legion was Kutlak's alone. But in truth, this insularity masked a darker secret. for since the final days of the destruction of the Catan, some terrible force had haunted Kutlak. It has marked and tainted him, turned his triumphs into empty ashes, and threatened the mask of sanity he wore as both a general and a commander. Over time, the cloying, hungering shadow that hung about him darkened, and began to impress itself even on the soulless machine minds of the Necrons around him, making him a pariah even to his own kind. If the ancient legends are to be believed, it was by the hand of this Nemesaur that the Catan known as Landugor the Flayer was betrayed to its demise. Although the Maynarkh dynasty has long scorned and refuted this claim of betrayal, regardless, some strange, nightmarish taint or even a curse hangs around Kutlak and his kin. Those unfortunate enough to draw close can feel a terrible malignance and a splinter of madness radiating from the Nemesaur's machine body, which claws at their minds and threatens to overwhelm them with insanity. When Kutlak finally awoke from the great sleep, he was both more and less what he had been. His eye lenses now blazed with an unhallowed cold light, a gaze that even other fellow Necron lords could not easily meet. In battle he is a terrifying figure, whose gliding android shell is blackened as if by fire and bedecked with skulls and bones of his victims. Sempiternal weave coats his necrodermis body. This ancient technology threads the exoskeleton with filaments of phased-hardened adamantium, making the Nemesaur's body as strong as Space Marine Terminator armor. The Nemesaur carries his dynasty's Obsidax, a specially crafted midnight black hyperblade that vibrates across dimensional states and can slice through a warrior, much like an Imperial's power weapon. This once proud and glory-hungry general has now become a nightmarish and near-silent monster, the eroded engrams of his mind, driven only by a burning desire to destroy the living and re-establish the rightful supremacy of his dynasty. Once Kutlak was able to fully awaken his warriors, he began his invasion. He led the Maynarkh dynasty into the Imperial Orpheus sector on the edge of the Segmentum Tempestus. The attack was preceded by a communication blackout, which left the Orpheus sector cut in two. The Necrons advanced in two distinct lines of battle, one invading the sector from the outer darkness, with the second entering the sector from the galactic south and the territories of the former Lyax sector. Unable to call for help, the entire eastern half of the Orpheus sector succumbed quickly, with only the Space Marines of the Angel's Revenant chapter putting up a true fight, but even their sacrifice was not enough to stop the Xeno advance. 100 solar days after the Necrons' offensive began, the silence was broken, and a tide of astropathic warnings and distress signals reached the Orpheus sector's capital world of Amara Prime. Only now realizing that it had come under attack, the Imperium mobilized its vast armies, but it could not prevent the Drusian subsector from being overrun. To the Imperium's surprise, Kutlak stopped his advance after 100 solar days. As tradition deemed it, their enemies would be given 2 cycles of the ancient Necron tier moon to prepare themselves to meet their death. The Orpheus sector's Imperial governor, Calibor Lan, used this time to turn his world, Amara Prime, into a fortress, stripping other worlds of their defenses and transferring them to Amara. Crusading forces and reinforcements allocated to purge the chaos-ridden Chimerium system were rerouted to Amara, including armies drawn from the Necromundan regiments and the fearsome Death Corps of Krieg of the Imperial Guard. Most importantly, perhaps, the entire Space Marine chapter of the Minotaurs, under the chapter master Asterion Moloch, joined the defenders of Amara. And yet this stronghold of Imperial might was laid low in a single solar day, when the Necrons almost entirely destroyed the powerful battle fleet defending the planet and landed their troops unopposed on their surface. Had it not been for the desperate counterattack of the Minotaur's chapter fleet, the stoic resistance of the Death Corps, total victory would have been achieved. Yet through great sacrifice and bloody determination, Moloch faced Kutlak on the bridge of his flagship, the Carrion-class tomb ship, Dead Hand. The Minotaur's chapter master and his elite First Company veterans succeeded in wounding the Nemesaur, and Kutlak was able to tear through Moloch's Terminator bodyguards and was able to deal the finishing blow to the Contemptor pattern dreadnought known as the Ancient Garyon when Moloch himself intercepted and engaged him in personal combat. Though equally matched, the combat ended when the tomb ship was hit by a broadside of Imperial firepower, casting Moloch to fall out into the void and leaving the Necron fleet disengaged. Having not anticipated this level of stubbornness amongst their foes, the Necrons retreated with something akin to respect for these vermins which had settled upon their worlds. For the Imperium, however, the loss of the Battle of Amara proved so severe that the sector had to be abandoned and officially dissolved as a sector Imperialis. The fighting, however, continued as the Undying Legions progressed to the Galactic West, and the Imperium tried to salvage what it could from the remains of the Orpheus sector. Since the devastation in the Orphean War, Kutlak has continued to lead the legions of the Maynarkh throughout the entire galaxy. Utilizing the ancient technology of the Dolmen Gates, the Nemesaur has spread destruction and conquest, making sure all intelligent races tremble at the mention of the Nemesaur Kutlak, the Godslayer, and the Cardinal Lord of the Maynarkh. Now, if you've ever asked yourself, can chaos corrupt the Necrons, please check out the following link, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. This was Garsh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.
Oh, I used to put my freedom first.